earlier this evening in the middle of the meditation that we had from 5 to 7, we had an initiation ceremony for two people who were taking the first and the final vow in the Nayaswami order. The Nayaswami order is the reason that I wear blue, and that many of the people here wear blue or yellow, and white also, but it's not so obvious. It's not so distinctive. And this is a dedicated order that Swami Kriyananda developed 7 years ago, and is a part of what we express here. And so going through, in preparation for this evening, I was reviewing the vows. The Nayaswami vow is the final life vow that I myself have taken, but the first vow is called a pilgrim's vow. And in between, there's kind of what you would imagine to be in between. And reading the pilgrim vow this evening, I was struck by the lines. The vow deals with what you would expect it to deal with: attachments, desires, material hopes, aspirations, attachment to work, expectations. Much of what I was reading out of Master's words. We live so close to this life. This life looks so big to us because we're holding it so close, like this. I was reminded of a woman, Bella Potapovskaya, Bella Bingham, she was when she died. And she died of cancer. She knew the cancer was coming. Her mother had died of cancer, and it wasn't that she welcomed it, but she saw that it was going to happen. So she made conscious decisions about how she would live her last weeks, knowing full well what the end would be, how much she would stave off death, or the various choices you can make. So she was in the last days of her life and was dying with great freedom. It wasn't one of those times where no one was allowed to speak. People die in different ways, and some want to affirm that they're going to live even up to their last breath. She was quite cheerful about passing on. Before I'll tell you the most important part, about 2 weeks before she died, she was in her bed somewhere, and a friend came in and just happened to remark how nice her hair looked. And Bella looked at her and said, "I'm going to be the cutest little corpse you ever saw." I mean, gallows humor, but at the same time, like, at this point, do you think I care? But also, just like, as long as you're alive, we're going to be thinking in the same way. We're going to be thinking like, women, and your hair looks very nice. Just crazy, isn't it? All of it together, and Bella just took it so easily. But when she was actually at the very end, she said to a friend, she said, "I'm lying here," and she said, "I'm seeing thousands of faces." Thousands was the phrase she used, of faces just passing in front of me. And I realized that every one of them represents me in a different incarnation. And she says, watching all these faces, it's very hard to be concerned about this one. I'm about to move out of this one into something else, who knows what. And how do I put that into perspective? There's that famous story in India that Swami would sometimes tell about a man who dreamt, who had a dream. Well, it goes this way, let me do it backwards. The man woke up, and that day his only son was bitten by a cobra and died. And his wife came to him, hysterical with grief. And he remained very calm. And finally she became enraged with him. "How can you be so calm in the face of what's just happened?" And then he said to her with great love, he said, "Last night I had a very vivid dream that I had 7 sons, and all 7 sons were bitten by cobras, and all 7 sons died." He said, "So I don't know what to mourn. Do I mourn the 7 sons in that dream, or the 1 son in this dream?" And it sounds so impossible for us who are living with, as Master said, with the blade of grass of our life right in front of us, to even begin to understand where you put such a thought. because it feels cold, it feels unnatural, it even sounds, on a certain level, unhealthy, to be so uninvolved in the life we're living. And yet, we always read how the masters tell us, this is just a dream. Stand back from it a little bit. So I was particularly interested when I'm looking at the pilgrim vow, and I see what Master says, what Swamiji says there is, I offer up to you my attachments. I will search my mind mentally every night and offer up to you whatever desires I find there. And in every place where he's urging us toward greater spiritual freedom, but all that he says is, I will offer it to you. It doesn't even say, I will strive to let go of it, or I need to overcome this, or I have to be somebody other than I am. It just says, I'll see what I have, and then I'll offer it to you. And there's so much subtle power in that. I was remembering here, I talk so much I try not to remember what I say, because I would be so bored if I could remember it all. But I do remember something I said last summer, but I remember it because it's something I've said really often to myself. And this is how I've come to understand it. For many years of my spiritual life, I always saw what I was supposed to be. And it's partly from growing up in the American culture where we're valued so much by what we do. What we do is how we're evaluated here. I remember in the early years of our school, we went and visited a number of the other schools here, and we went up to one of the most prominent and well-respected private schools in the area. I won't bother to name it, because it really could be any of them. And the school was very proud of the fact that they had classes in self-esteem. And in the classroom, there was a tree, and it was called the SelfEsteem Tree. And every child had put leaves on that tree, which explained why they felt good about themselves. And there were maybe 30 leaves there. And I had the time and I read them all. 29 of them dealt with something that they had accomplished. I won the soccer game, I won the spelling bee, I got straight A's on my this, I'm first in the class in history, I like this. One person said, I'm less moody than I used to be. But every other one was what they'd been able to do to prove themselves worthy in this world. And that was why they felt good about themselves. Of course, what happens when they fail? I mean, it's an entire self-worth based on the fact that nothing's ever going to go wrong. And how can we, and also the unbearable tension that puts on us. Because what happens if we really can't measure up to it? I was born in a circumstance, the town where I was born, El Paso, Texas. I lived there till I was 15. It was not a high consciousness place. Maybe it's changed. And my brother and I and my sister, we were somewhat different than most of the people there. And my brother and I especially, just were very, very school smart. And that's just a particular kind of intelligence. I don't really consider it anything except what it is. We were both school smart. We were just born to it, past lives. So I was always in this position where everybody thought I was so good because I was so good at school. And it created the weirdest insecurity in me. Because, for one thing, partly because of where I was, it was absolutely effortless for me to be good at school. I mean, I could do it with 2 brain cells. So I was completely conscious of the fact that regardless of how tall I was compared to the people next to me, I was not actually tall. And it represented nothing for me. And yet everybody thought it was so terrific. And so it just made me crazy. It's really the only word I can think of without being old enough to understand why I felt so crazy. But what it was, when I look at it now, it's I knew that there was a completely other, more valid way to determine self-worth. And everybody around me was telling me what I knew to be a lie, but I couldn't figure out why. And as a consequence, I felt so insecure. So then you find the spiritual path. And I remember in the early years of this spiritual life, Yoga Journal, which at that time was there was no internet, it had to be print media. It published an article called The Dark Side of Meditation. This was in the 70s, The Dark Side of Meditation. It was a marvelous article. It said many type A competitive people take up meditation because it'll help de-stress them. But then they become extremely competitive about being good at meditation. And since the demand of meditation is nothing less than perfection, then they're always in an even more anguished state. And it was true. That it was goofy, but it was true. And I myself, because of my karma, I spent a lot of my spiritual life, I'm talking almost 5 decades now, a lot of it thinking that there was something over there that I would somehow step into. And if I wasn't able to step into it, it was just the dark side of meditation. And somehow, finally, this phrase, which of course I'd heard from the beginning, just offer it to God. I remember Swamiji telling me at one point, you just offer it to Divine Mother. And I remember thinking when he said that to me, I believe the first summer. Circumstances I don't recall. But he said something to me, like I presented some incredibly elaborate, anguished issue to him, and he said, just offer it to Divine Mother. I thought, well, yeah, and then what should I do? Like, is that actually like a solution? What am I supposed to do with that? I remember just thinking, what is he talking about? But decades later, after the relationship becomes, I think after all the hypocrisy gets hammered out of you, and all of the pretense gets hammered out of you, the most marvelous thing about the spiritual path, especially this path, is the only path I know. It doesn't matter how you try to game the system, eventually it catches up with you. I've seen people come to the spiritual path in the thought they have serious psychological issues they have to work out, but you can come to the spiritual path and you don't have to deal with them, you just give it all to God. And I watch them, I'm talking decades, they'll play it for a long time, but sooner or later, you have to become authentic. There's no fooling this. There's nobody else here, just you and the actual reality of who you actually are. And there's no starting place for our spiritual life except right here, wherever it may be, any place at all. I used to get very confused when I first came from Ananda village and lived in this place where I've lived for 30 years now. It's been most of my life in ministry, so to speak. I couldn't understand the people around me. And I finally understood that everybody's just standing right where they're standing. And all of us, nobody sitting in this room who doesn't find something exquisitely beautiful about the idea of living just for God. But I dare say, and I'll speak first for myself, there's not one among us who doesn't also have a lot of side stories going on. Because we just do. I want only Thee, Lord, most of the time, sometimes, tonight. Lord, I am Thine, and I'm also belong to Rotary Club and Google and wherever else I live, and my family and my children and my pets and my fears and my hopes and my attachments. And Swamiji's answer to all of it, just give it to God. And there comes a point where really that's just what you have to say. You just have to say, I've examined myself for all my desires and my attachments, and wow, look at them, Lord. And the mantra that I finally come up with is, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about it? But you see, just even having the courage, which at least speaking for myself, it took me a long time to have the courage to just say, Lord, this really is who I am. I remember a friend of mine, she was with another ashram and she used to travel around and teach a lot. And I guess I was traveling at the same time because occasionally we intersected. And I met with her in some city where neither of us lived. She actually didn't live anywhere. She traveled all the time. But we intersected, and so we were spending some time together. And I saw that it was almost time for her class to start. And normally one gathers one's forces before a class. And I said, do you need some time to prepare for your class? And she smiled at me so sweetly, and she said, too late, too late. She said, what you see is what you get. Like, if I'm not ready now, I don't think 15 minutes is going to make any difference. But I've always remembered that. Just too late, too late. Whatever I am is what I am. I can't create another self that I'll call my spiritual self. My spiritual self is myself. And whatever it is, you just gather it up, and you may think, I wish it were more. I wish I had something else. I wish I had this beautiful, pure, selfless, free spirit to bring you. When I have that, Lord, that one's yours too. But until then, I just look at what I am, and I offer it to you. And I ask you, what shall we do? Just guide me. And that's all that God wants. In the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most beautiful verses, which you all, I'm sure, know, it's Krishna starts saying, give everything to me, think of me all the time, never forget me, and if you can't do that, then just serve me, and if you can't just serve me, just love thee. And it just goes down, and he keeps reducing the demand like this, all the way to the bottom. And then Edward Arnold says, if even in this thy faint heart fail thee. And this is just so sweetly put. If even in this tiny little request of God, thy faint heart fail thee, the Lord says, bring me your failure. Because that may be all you have. Because we can't create a spiritual self out of anything except what we already have. Thousands of lifetimes we've been living, thousands of lifetimes, wearing all kinds of different faces and all kinds of different adventures, and now we're wearing this one. And here it is. And this, in the Bible, Jesus says, at the great hour of his crucifixion, I could be rescued by angels, but for this hour was I born, and in the drama it's the thunder and the lightning and the chords, for this hour was I born. And I realized one day that any of us say that at any moment. We imagine that's a grand statement by a free master before the ultimate sacrifice. But right now, and this can be depressing, but this is a fact. All those thousands or millions of incarnations, all those years, all those New Year's resolutions brought you right to here. Maybe you feel like you're somewhere, maybe you feel like you're nowhere, but it really makes no difference, because whatever it is, just put it in a beautiful little basket and offer it to God and say, okay, sir, what are we going to do about this? Where are we going to take it? How can we make it more beautiful? And even if in this thy faint heart fail thee, then bring him your fear. Bring him your absolute fear of offering anything for fear of what he might do. And then ask him what we're going to do about this. And that's the only way. Swami Kriyananda, who was the most powerful, magnificent human I've ever can even imagine, certainly the only one I've ever known, but I can't imagine someone with more courage, more dedication, more purity. I just won't even bother, the list is so long. Somebody gave him once this little figurine, extremely kitsch, this little figurine of a little boy praying like this. And Swamiji loved it. And he remarked privately that the person who gave it to him had great intuition. He said, because that's how I always see myself. That's what he said. I always just see myself as just that little boy with the sweetest, most sentimental expression on his face. I thought, my, that is his secret, isn't it? That we're looking at all of this, but inside he's just still this tiny, humble person, just bringing the little basket of who he is and offering it to his master. Here we are, Master, what shall we do about it? And what Master said to him was, what we'll do about it is we'll make you free. And ultimately that's what he'll do for all of us, if we let him. It's up to us. Tonight we're going to give us all that same opportunity, because we're going to move, we're going to go through two parts. The last part of our evening is going to be a purification ceremony, where all of you get the opportunity to kneel before one of the light bearers and ask for purification by the grace of God, which is just what I'm saying. Gathering up whatever you are and just offering it to God. Our response is, the Master says, open your heart to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life. And we'll bless you at the heart chakra. And after that's done, a piece of paper that I hope you've gathered from the back, we'll have these candles lit, and you can offer it into the fire and put it in the burning bowl in the spirit of everything I've said. Before that, however, we're going to use the power of Om to attune ourselves more deeply to that inner power. And so we're going to recite together two mantras led by Swami Kriyananda, a recording of his voice, two of the most ancient of the Sanskrit mantras, and we'll do them each for about 10 minutes. And each one will end with the playing of the gong, which is really the sound of Om. So the purpose of doing this is a perfect continuation of just what I was saying tonight and what Master said to us at the beginning of the evening. The constant through all of creation is that vibration of Om. And these mantras and the gong take us deeper and deeper away from the periphery of the details of our life, and deeper into just that eternal center, which is the enduring thread through all of these different lifetimes. So let us really work together. When we're doing something as a group, you have to realize that we have a responsibility to each other. That's why we come together. So make a special effort as we listen to these mantras to repeat them if you can, if you know them well enough to repeat, or at least to concentrate word by word. I developed a habit when Swami Kriyananda would speak toward the later years that I would listen to him talk, and even still when I am concentrated enough. I try to allow every word that's spoken be the only thing in my consciousness and not anticipate the next sound. In other words, to be completely present. So let's experiment when we're listening to these mantras to just, even though we may know what the next syllable is going to be, let's act as if the only reality is this syllable and the next syllable and the syllable after. And the more deeply all of us put our consciousness together, the more powerfully this vibration can change us.